Jeremy from Jerry.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my creative process here with you on the internet. If you'd like to support this channel, get additional bonus live streams twice a month, be able to read my comics for free online, get tons of additional bonus behind-the-scenes features, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/GERIMI. It's patreon.com/Jeremy. If you'd like to receive a free digital sketchbook and be able to get excerpts from my work in progress, animated GIFs, little blog posts about my creative process delivered right to your inbox once a month, you can go to newsletter.jeremy.net. That will take you to the sign up page for my monthly newsletter. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comics, if you read digitally on Comixology or Amazon Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up Volume 1 of my comic book Morning Star, which is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. This book contains issues 1 through 4. I am currently assembling Volume 2 as we speak. That will be out shortly. And if you'd like to purchase individual issues, you can go to my main website, jeremy.net. That has the links for all of my social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of it. And you can pick up a copy of the final issue of Morning Star issue 8. It's available in print, and it's also available on Comixology and individual issues. And today we have a special guest, returning guest, friend of the show, comic book color artist, art educator, John Ercek. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? I didn't even realize, was my visual like I wasn't even paying attention.
It is on. You're
okay.
up. You're on the screen. We've got John's monitor up here because last week when I was drawing, John caught me slipping, and he's graciously offered to come up here and kick some knowledge. Before we dive in, John, I've got just so everyone knows, I've got a link to John's Instagram in the chat and in the description for the video. You're also still at South Bay Art Department, correct?
I'm still at the South Bay Art Department. I'm doing mostly privates these days, so you have to call them and say, "Yeah, I heard this John Ercek guy. He can help people out with some things," and you hit that up. And then I'm also with another organization called Boogaloo Cafe, and we're doing an online convention. Boogaloo Cafes it caters towards people with neurological diversity. So basically anything from Asperger's to autism to anything like that. So we teach students in that vein. And we're going to have an online convention October 28th. It's the Thursday before Halloween, which is great. And we're going to profile some of their works. And it's been a lot of fun working with them. I teach them comics, Photoshop, and all that jazz. But what I wanted to talk to you about today, and this might even come as a little surprise, is emotions and to a certain extent, Stoicism. In artwork. All right.
Emotions and Stoicism in artwork.
Yeah. And what people don't realize is that when they're trying to draw something, it's not quite as literal as you see something and you capture the image and you try to put it down on paper. There's a lot of psychological self-defense mechanisms that humans have that get in the way of this process. And this is especially true when I'm teaching students perspective, right? So if you think about it, well, we have to, I gotta pitch all this. Okay. If you think about it, this really makes sense because you've seen this in every child's drawing. Whenever they draw a person and they're still a young kid and they're starting to draw, they draw a person and they do their little stick figure, and then they draw a big head, and then they want to make sure that they have the eyes, and maybe they'll draw the nose. Sometimes they don't even draw the nose, right? And then they draw the mouth. And what's going on there is, and by the way, some of this is redundant for you, Jeremy, I know, but this is more for the audience so they understand.
Yeah, of course. And I always like a refresher.
Yeah. And we're going to bring this back around to what you were doing in your drawing, or what I saw in your drawing, and then we can sort of sit back and analyze it and see if this brings. I'm hoping this will be fruitful for when you're approaching more figure drawings in the future. So we have this emotional attachment to the people we're drawing, but we're not emotionally attached to their arms and how their arms look or their legs. We're emotionally attached to who that person is, and we recognize them by the face. So that's why when we're little kids, we draw these big faces on these little bodies for drawing the humans. Okay, well, eventually we grow out of that. We realize, okay, yeah, you know, the human body looks something different. You got to draw something more realistic, right? But it still pops up again, and I do this all the time when I'm teaching students perspective and in geometrics. This is actually a shot from inside the South Bay Art Department. If you end up doing classes there, you'll end up seeing stuff like this, especially if I'm teaching there. So what I really want to focus on is the concept of this cube, okay? And because of the parallax in this photo, I actually kind of want to rotate that just a little bit. All right, there we go. Now we can focus on this cube. Okay, so we recognize the cube as being a six-sided shape of equal dimensions. Okay, right? And so if we draw it, we draw something like that, right? But our emotional attachment to what a cube is gets in the way when we try to draw the cube in three-dimensional space. We understand that a cube is something that has one face that's equal on that side, one face that's equal on that side, and most importantly, one face that's equal on this side, right? So with rare exception, every person that has to draw a cube in this situation, they emotionally panic. What's a good emotional panic color? I guess we'll go with yellow. They emotionally panic with that top panel, and they end up making a drawing. And I know you've seen this thousands of times, even if you may even remember when you used to draw this. Oh, that's not a good color or on that background. Let's see, where can I put this? We'll put the green on the red. Instead of drawing what you see there, emotionally, they get worried that their audience doesn't understand what they're drawing, and they draw something like that, where they make the top panel larger because that's what their emotional attachment to the cube is. It's like, I want my audience to understand that all these sizes are equal in size, and to draw a shape like this rhombus on the very top is just something that scares them. Okay, so this is a big step for artists when they're trying to capture what they're drawing, or what they visually see, and trying to capture that to a sheet of paper. Okay, so our emotional attachment of what we're seeing and trying to relay to our viewers interferes in the process of us trying to just do something that's as straightforward as capturing a two-dimensional image from our three-dimensional surroundings. All right, so that's the basics. That's the fundamentals. Now I am going to, let's see, what did I just do? Oh yeah, that's right. We are over here. So let's erase our little childhood figure character. And this is where I get to test you. I have one line on the left-hand side, and I have another line on the right-hand side. And which one of those two curves is more dramatic?
Well, that depends on what angle we're looking at the form from.
Right? Now, would you have said that if you had not heard everything that we just paid attention to? Right?
You know what? You might have caught me slipping.
Yeah. All right, so let's have a look at your drawing. We have here this drawing here with this line that comes straight up the figure. And I watched you draw this figure twice, and you were emotionally attached to trying to exaggerate the figure, which is fine because that's what we do in art. We're supposed to exaggerate the emotions, but you were trapped in not letting yourself explore another option of exaggeration. Okay. And so what I mean by this is, I want to show you a different way you could approach this figure, and then we can discuss. Okay. So, and by the way, you are really good with hips, and I am not as great as hips, and I'm like halfway worried I'm going to flub the hips on this one. There are a couple of things in this drawing that really frustrated me.
I just draw hips like boxes, and you seem to have boxes down. So.
No. So what I mean by that is, you draw hips like boxes. I actually use cylinders from time to time just because of the iliac crest and the medial glutes. They sort of form a nice little circle, so sometimes that helps me. But what I mean by the way you draw the hips is you nail the landmarks better than I do, because when I'm looking at this, I see a landmark here and I see a landmark here, so I'm actually seeing something like this, and I had to see your drawing to realize, wait a minute, no, that's not right, because all his weight is up here and I'm being thrown off by the clothing. So yeah, it makes, like, the way you did your hips makes a lot more sense than the way I would get fooled by this because of the clothing. So that's what I mean by hips. You do a really good job of landmarking your hips. So with that being said, I'm going to steal from you and pull the angle of your hips, which, by the way, notice the level of exaggeration in that cube versus what is probably a more subtle turn here. So I'm going
to change the layout to try and make it so it's got you on the full screen. So I feel like we're going to see more of what's going on better with you laying it. We've got more room.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, I need to get rid of this window too. What I really need to do here is let's actually just bring everything closer together. Oh wait, that's not what I wanted to copy. There we go. There we go. And then I can bring this up and we'll pull this over. All right. So, and yeah, by the way, so the way you have your hips angled here, you're exaggerating. Let's make sure I have a color here. You're exaggerating the angle there in the same way somebody might exaggerate the angle from what they're seeing here on this, right? Okay. So let me show you what I felt like was you were trapped in an emotional attachment to one form of exaggeration, and it was keeping you from exploring another form of exaggeration. So what I want to show you, and mind you, is like us using the language of artists where we're not authoritarian, nothing is right or wrong. It's just different approaches. So I'm going to do my hips with your, wow, I suddenly upped the scale there. I also shrink my brush a little bit, but that's okay. Oh, also, I'm not a big fan of the way he drew this knee, because he drew this knee in a way that makes the thigh looks like it's coming forward, but with the isolating the contact points on the floor, it's very clear that the whole leg has to be going backwards. Like the way that knee looks. We're not seeing like a top edge and then the kneecap hiding behind it as it's receding away. He sort of flattened out that knee, and I really don't like that.
A little bit open to interpretation, which when you're learning can be bad.
Yeah, right. Okay, so notice this curve that I did for my gesture, where I'm focusing more on this part, the sternum receding back and away from us. So where you did a cube that's going sideways as your form of exaggeration, I'm going to go in a different direction, and I'm going to pull up the underside so that we can see the underside, and then I'm going to start turning this cube back in an extreme perspective, even distorting it. Okay. And now I have a breastbone that's receding backwards. And now I have a different form of exaggeration versus the way you exaggerated your pose.
Yeah. You know, I can see now that the big difference is that because the distance between the shoulder and the hips was shorter on the right-hand side, I went into lean that way as opposed to what's really happening, which is we're looking at a figure leaning back, but at a perspective.
Yeah. And perspective is a big thing. In fact, perspective is such a big thing. It's really painful right now doing Zoom drawings, because I'm starting to be painfully aware of how short the focus or short the lens measurement is on digital cameras with these models posing in these small spaces, and the level of distortion I see in stuff like the legs or the hands as they get closer to us. Where's a good one here? It's like this one really threw me off. The hands started growing on me a lot, and I realized part of it was me missing it, but the other part of it was the camera lens distortion is just really bad. All right, so let's get back to this real fast. So the thing is, you're adding a toolkit to your arsenal to help navigate or help see things in different ways. Whereas if you were not using the boxes, it's very difficult to actually pull off that illusion of, yeah, I want a torso that's rotating away from me, and this one I'm like super exaggerating, right? So if I do it like that, it's very clear that this person's like doing a back bend like a 12-year-old gymnast, not like a 20-year-old man, right? Because that's just not possible. Well, it is possible for some of them, right? Okay, so I'm hoping that now that you've seen this, you will be able to encounter these two curves and understand you have different ways of being exaggerated with your cubes versus, in fact, did you draw? You didn't draw the top of the cube. Yeah, no, you didn't.
No, I didn't draw the top of the cube.
Yeah, right. And so, God, I totally was not even visualizing the form on that, because we should be looking at the left-hand side of the cube, not the right-hand side of the cube there. Okay, so that's what I'm hoping. Now, so this is an example of where the cubes can be very helpful for visualizing the human form in a three-dimensional space and adding perspective to it. But this is also an example of where using cubes really trips you up from an anatomical point of view. And the problem here is we're dealing with clavicles that are at an angle. They're not straight across the front of the cube. Okay, so you draw the cube, and then you have to figure out where your clavicles are going. Let's see how you handled this. Yeah, so you see here, one clavicle is coming down and one clavicle is coming across the top.
And in the drawing, they're both going up.
Yeah. Here in the drawing, we locate where the base of the neck is. So one clavicle has to be coming up here, and one's coming up here. And so there's a subtle V here when you're dealing with the bones. But what we're dealing with is an effect where people don't realize if we do a top view and we have our clavicles coming back here like this, and the shoulder blades are on the back side like this, right? This makes sense, everybody? Everybody can read that okay? And this will be the head. Well, but we don't need the head. What we need to realize is that your clavicles can move in such a way where they come forward. All right. Now, this is a very unusual movement. Like you're hunching forward, you're bringing your clavicles forward. And then when you do that, the muscles of the pectorals form this inverted shape. And just as an aside, when we're doing that, we don't have the hard edge underneath them as much when we're doing stuff like this, right? Okay. So this guy, this is us looking down at the rib cage and the clavicles moving forward. This is the opposite situation here. And to exaggerate this, I'm going to put my rib cage in here. Let's see. Okay. And the sternum, of course, we know where the top of the sternum is. So now we know that we have a rib cage like this. And we're dealing with clavicles. Like, to exaggerate this, I would bring the clavicles up like this, and then this clavicle up like this. And that's completely complete deviation from the top of your box here. Okay. So that's not that hard to apply to the rotated form or to the rotated box. But in some cases, I find myself having more success changing the box to either a bell shape or to just a flat out full on curve. You were mentioning last week an artist that I'd never heard of before, who did the shot glass and the head.
Oh, Walt Reed.
Yeah,
Walt
so
Reed.
that was a fun discovery for me just watching your channel. So I appreciate that.
Have you ever seen, so you should, if you have a chance, take a look at his book, because I find in terms of fundamentals, just learning how to break the human figure into primitive shapes that you can manipulate, cylinders, boxes, and spheres. I feel like that's one of the best books.
Yeah.
Like better than Loomis.
Yeah. And it never ceases to surprise me how often students will, like 12-year-old girls will walk into the studio and they'll do their drawings where they picked up different things from different places. But it never ceases to surprise me how they'll break down the shapes of just the simple forms, and they still don't even know anatomy, and they still do stuff that I can't do because I'm overthinking it with all my anatomy knowledge. So it's amazing what you can still learn from even people who are still exploring their fundamentals. And so I definitely appreciate all that. We got any comments in here? Any thoughts on what I just showed in terms of emotional attachment, perspective, and anatomy, and these different forms?
Yeah, if anybody in the chat, if you guys have any questions specifically on the stuff we've discussed so far, when you're seeing a primitive form or looking at it, and just because you're projecting it in one way or focusing on one aspect of it, you're distorting the figure based on that. Kind of, it goes back to that discussion about flipping pages. How once you flip a drawing, you look at it, and all of a sudden, all of them.
Yes.
The way you have something skewed in the wrong way, when you flip it, you're like, oh my God. This is horrible. You can see exactly why it's off. Whereas the emotional part that you're talking about is that when you flip it back to the way you started drawing, it's like not being able to catch your own typos. Your brain is chosen to perceive it in that manner. And the minute you flip it, you can see the other way.
Yeah. Yep. So that's what I wanted to point out to you. And I got to say, I mean, we got to stop meeting like this, where every time I come online with you, I have a deadline. And I'm just like, I'm totally pitching a deadline once again, but I can at least hang out for a few more minutes. But yeah, it's a little bit like I think one of the hardest things to understand in Star Wars with a Jedi, and they're talking about detachment and not being attached to things. That this is the type of thing where you're attached to a preconceived conclusion, and that keeps you from resolving your issues in more expansive manners. So that's what the biggest thing I'm hoping for you, Jeremy, is once again you'll be conscious that you have a proclivity or a bias towards one solution, and now this solution will pop up more often for you. That's what I'm hoping for.
That's exactly the kind of thing. I'm grateful that you were on to bring up, because what's funny is I've been working on exercises specifically to work on that problem, because let me see if I've got some other images in this file. I've been doing a whole bunch. Let me switch this to where is my screen?
There we go.
I've been working specifically just on exercises to work against that bias that I have. So like this one that I did beforehand, this one I feel like I got, but you can see how.
Yeah. So with this one, what I noticed is this was a very unique and interesting pose, because we're still dealing with the clavicle problem on the top of the boxes. And on one level, it doesn't make sense, but he's actually shrugging his shoulders. As he's pulling, his shoulders are going up. And that's kind of weird, because you think with like you're trying to pull something, you're trying to pull all your energy back. But I guess it kind of makes sense in that you're pulling on something and it's pulling on you, so your shoulders start coming up and up. So that's what I noticed here. I think also something for you to consider is just clavicle movement in general. You don't have you haven't had a chance to fully explore the opportunities by exaggerating clavicle movement. And if you start seeing that or visualizing that, and especially like my advice would be to look at the pit of the neck and see that as the top of your three-dimensional box, instead of where you've located the top of your three-dimensional box here, where you're trying to make it even with the shoulders. Because if you always have your shoulders at the top of your three-dimensional box, that's going to limit your ability for visualizing shoulder movement, which frankly, when you start moving your shoulders around, it's outrageous how much we can move our shoulders around. And then when you think about how much we move them around, it's outrageous that they don't get ripped off when we're trying to pull ourselves up over a fence or swing from limb to limb. Not that we get to do that often at this stage in our evolutionary development. But
well, I mean, the hell, that's how people get dislocated shoulders.
Yeah.
But
One of those.
But the thing is, I've been very aware in my work from figure drawing classes that for me, just the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis, I haven't been like, there's a lot of energy and dynamics in there, and that sometimes I'll either simplify it and flatten it out, or I'll distort it in the wrong way. And I've been filling pages with diagrams like the very top, the two drawings on the right. The lower one is me just adding the cylinders and rounding out the figure. But it's really been that one at the top. I filled pages where all I'm doing is just working on a box for the rib cage, a box for the pelvis, a box for the head, and just working out the relationship between those. And I've been doing studies where I'm just filling pages with that to try and work specifically on the issue that was in that one drawing where it was off so much.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And the other thing I do try to tell my students is do not be attached to one form of geometry for solving problems. Like when I do a head tilt, I'll change my head to a cylinder instead of working with either a wedge and a ball shape or with a potato shape, just so I can visualize the roundness as the head tilts down and the eyebrows start turning into an inverted U. But like, so even on this image, like I see what you're doing and I appreciate everything that you're doing, but I also got to point something out.
Go for it.
Like, let's zoom in here.
Do you want me to send this to you?
No, I got it right here. All right. So here's one problem with visualizing the hips is the degree, the fact that on the outside of our hips, and this took me way too long in my life to learn. I did not learn this for at least a good 10 years. But when you have the hips, you have the legs, and you have your inseam measurement, right? So you have how long the leg is from the crotch. And then you have your lateral or outside seam measurement, which is the waistline or the hip, right? So your leg ends up forming this diagonal relationship between the outer point of the hip and the inner point where the crotch is, right? And that's a nightmare for us to visualize when we're dealing with cylinders. So if this is our hip up here, where the leg starts over here, and then this is the crotch here, like we kind of need a leg that comes from here instead. Let me call that again. We need a leg that comes from here, like this shape, instead of the shape that you have here. And this is why I hate the little mannequin dolls that they sell in art stores, and I never want to use them because they couldn't help me solve my problems with hips. It's just like, that was a nightmare to deal with. So trying to apply, I wish I did that on a different layer so then I could just drag it over to what we have here. Because we have, now granted, we need the space for the medial glutes to make their attachment, right? So I was like, choo. And then what I'm really scared about this illustration, granted it's a master, but those masters did not have access to the anatomical knowledge that we do these days, and especially with what you find on Proco. The artist here is not attaching the quadriceps to, like, 3 of them do come right up here to the great trochanter, but another one has to attach. Actually, you know what this is doing? It's missing the tensor fascia latae on the outside. That's what this illustration is missing. That it's missing the little tent at the top of the leg. So I think that's what it's missing. And then this line is fine, right? So then when you look at that and you're trying to get your box shape, which, okay, now we got this weird distorted box. I guess it's like that, right?
Well, I mean, I specifically chose this because it's a challenging angle.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. But my problem is it's a challenging angle, but it's also a challenging angle not of a photograph of a human, but of an artist trying to capture a human, and how they solve the problem might not have been realistic to the human figure that they were looking at. You always have to navigate that. So the bottom line here, though, is look at the degree of overlap I have here just by tracing the drawing. Right? I'm just tracing the drawing and I have this degree of overlap. Whereas you have the whole, you created the impression, right? This isn't accurate. You've created the impression, and this isn't how you would solve the drawing once you put skin on all this, but you've created the impression that your crotch would be up here versus over here. The crotch, almost by necessity, has to be like down here, right? You can mess around with that a little bit. Okay, so that's what I see in that one. And I mean, this is like 1% stuff, right? Does a drawing really need to be this good? And the only reason why it does is because we're in the competitive environment that we're in, where we all have access to this knowledge now. And to a certain extent, it doesn't need to be this good. We can flub these drawings, but still create an awesome drawing that generates an emotional reaction in our audience, and it does what it does. So yeah, but that's what I see in these things. So I mean, your approach, the approach sometimes needs to change, where you're like, you know what, I'm not going to do a cube. I'm going to turn it into a triangle or a wedge pelvis, just so I can visualize the whole leg coming up from this sawed off hip. Like we're gonna saw off all that and turn this into like this diamond shape, right? Or sometimes what's the other, like you'll do a bowl shape or the underwear pattern. It's surprising how often the underwear pattern is very useful in this situation, because you even have a little bit of a ridge of your underwear at the very top, which is so handy for visualizing a space like this. You can put underwear on this guy easy.
Yeah, I first saw that as a kid in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just like, that feels so rinky-dink, and you're like, this is not real anatomy. But again, this is why 12-year-old girls can walk into our studio and do drawings that just blow me away. And it's just like, oh yeah, that is the easier solution. Why am I making this too complicated? So,
you know what? Yeah. Do you ever look at the hang on, let me pull back to on the screen. Do you ever look at the SH Fig Arts figures for reference? Do you ever use any of these guys?
So I don't I mean, I don't have access to one. I mean, at a certain point, I'll pull off my clothes and look in a mirror. Or anything else of that nature. Like those figures definitely do look really solid. Although I've heard the nightmares about them falling apart as well. So I do think that they're great. But I'm also inclined to like find 3D resources and 3D mannequins and move them around. But again, if there's one thing those 3D mannequins are really bad at, it's visualizing the shoulder clavicle to shoulder blade relationship. It's hard to find. Most of them are just like the shoulder is just a sphere that you move around, and it doesn't appreciate the anatomy.
Shifting, like they can rotate like a ball joint, but it's the actual shifting that our joints are capable of that they can't mimic, and that's true with these figures as well. Yeah.
So I mean, it's almost like you need a figure that has a shoulder blade that's attached to the rib cage by a rubber band that will stretch, and then everything's anchored off of that neck point.
I mean, I've got a 2-foot skeleton in my studio, and even that one doesn't have the flexibility that we want.
Oh my God, with skeletons, like full-size skeletons that we'll see in a lab, their spines are straightened because of gravity, and they're hanging from their head. Their toes aren't curled the way the bones in our toes curl because of they're actually trying to make use of fat pads in our toes to actually get us to navigate ground and keep our balance. there's pluses and minuses to everything.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just, I mean, but it is also fascinating to watch, like just following Proco, of course, but and any other resources where people come along with even more observations as we get into more and more minutia. So yeah.
All right. On that note, I know you're on deadline.
Yep, I need to get out of here. Thank you. This has been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing seeing if this does have any impact. I'm hoping it's constructive. But
No,
we'll
it
see.
definitely is. You've pointed out. I mean, that's why I'm always studying, because no matter how many years I do, there's always blind spots, things that should be obvious. And I'm like, why am I making that mistake?
Yeah.
So having an extra pair of eyes to come and just say, hey man, just look at the figure like this. Just tweak your perspective a little bit like this, and and it can be very enlightening. So having a friend who's an art educator who's aware of what I'm doing can occasionally catch me slipping. That's super useful, and I'm glad you were able to make time to come on and chat with us for a bit.
Yeah, and the other thing I gotta say is, after trying to draw for 30 years, I have a newfound appreciation for the fundamentals. I love going back and just drawing boxes now, whereas I know when I was in college, it's like, when am I going to get to the good stuff? So it's just for anybody in the audience, there's going to be a threshold you cross where you suddenly start to realize, yeah, drawing these boxes is kind of fun. So,
yeah, it's tedious when you're young, but then you realize that's where all the magic is. Because if you can make simple cubes and cylinders feel dynamic, whatever you put on top of them will have that same dynamics.
Well, when I was in high school, I had the privilege of doing a college computer art class, which we won't say what year this was, but our instructor was an illustration in commercial arts. And one day he shows up and he says, listen, guys, if you can learn how to draw boxes, you can make $1 million. And we're all like, well, then why aren't you making $1 million? And he goes, because I don't know how to draw boxes. and he started to show us that his art director gives him prompts all the time, and they're giving him boxes because they're trying to illustrate the perspective and the angle, and they're not giving him any other details. It's like, this is the important stuff. Here's the boxes. Now do your job, render monkey, and put and it's just like, great. So, but anyways, all right. I hope you guys have a good session, and I've been enjoying watching over the past few weeks, and I'll be dropping in from time to time for sure.
Okay.
But I gotta get back on deadline.
For everyone who wants to check out John's work, his link to his Instagram is in the chat and the description of the video, as well as South Bay Art Department where he teaches. He's been doing private sessions instead of full-on classes recently, but you can contact him through there as well, through the South Bay Art Department. So, John, again, thank you for coming on, making time for us. The live stream is still going to be going for us, you guys watching. We're going to draw a little bit more, but John, it's always great to see you, chat with you. Look forward to the next time. Good luck with your deadlines.
All right, thank you.
Don't lose too much sleep. All right, guys, thanks. That was a great session there with my buddy John Ercek. Art educator, comic book color artist, who right now is busy trying to kick ass on some deadlines. So let's get back to us now. So some more comments in the chat. I see Trevor's in here. Skull. I see Solid Spider Snake is in the chat. Cassiel's here. Cassiel says, I see some mannequins that a lot of comic artists do that. Basically, the torso is a rib cage and underpants, the arms, a chain, special chain, the legs with a ball of box to articulation. Cassie also mentions that David Finch did a lot of this type of mannequin. Yeah, I mean, for most artists, there's a certain level of breaking down the figure into primitive forms that is very, very useful for just for, like I mentioned before, if you can let me cancel that. If you can break the figure down into primitive forms and make those primitive forms feel dynamic, whatever you draw on top of them will feel dynamic. So the drawing specifically that got this discussion going is this drawing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redraw this one here using some of the fundamentals that we talked about with John. And then if I have time, I'm going to flip open another drawing that I was going to do a study from. These studies have been from the Charles Barg drawing course. And you can find a lot of these images, most of them for free online. This is a drawing book that was done, I want to say, either late 1800s or early 1900s. In fact, I can grab the book that I have and take a look. Yeah, this is the book that I was able to find on Amazon, and it's just called the Charles Barg and Jean-Léon Jerome drawing course. So it basically consists of a bunch of drawing plates. This is specifically designed for artists who just copy. This is where master studies come from. And I don't use this book, as I mentioned in the last video where I was drawing studies, I don't use this the way the book was intended, which is to try and duplicate it line for line, tone for tone. I use this because it's a great collection of drawings and poses, and I just work off of the gestures. But let me see if it's got the dates in here. I'm looking for this. Let's see here. Introduction to the course. So it looks like the drawing course was first published in 1868. So this is an old school French drawing academic process. And this is really what, when you hear about drawing ateliers as opposed to just a normal workshop, this is kind of the atelier process where you start working from simple drawings to practice your rendering and proportion. Then you move on to drawing from casts, from like, you know, a sculpt of a bust or a sculpt of a figure, and then eventually move on to working from the live model itself. And by the way, if you guys think of any questions now, or if you rewatch this later, questions based on what I was discussing with John or some points that he brought up, feel free to leave them in the chat if you're not in here live, or throw them in the chat now or leave them as comments later. I can always forward those to John and see if there's additional questions that he can answer for you, because John, as an educator, loves to make sure to explain what he's doing and why. So let me start here. Enlarge this a little bit. So again, my whole thing is I've been working just on the relationship with these simple boxes. And the problem I had was that this should be bending to the left instead of bending to the right. So this is pretty similar to the diagram that John drew, where we're really seeing some of the underside of the rib cage. And I'm going to drop this down just a little bit. So when I was conceiving of this, I really made it feel like there was a lot more of a pull on the right side of the figure, when really it's just the fact that we're looking at this from an angle where we're looking up at this box, it's at this tilted angle. Because the hip, the pelvis is just slightly tilted down. And I'll tell you, I can tell from the way I'm drawing this, and I'm making the figure a little bit too wide. In fact, you know what? It pains me to do so, but I need to go in there and just cut off a big chunk of that and redraw this narrower, because I'm making it too friggin' wide. And see, this is one of the challenges when you're going back and forth between thinking in 3 dimensions versus 2 dimensions. Because sometimes in an effort to get the proportion right on the 2 dimension, the 2-dimensional axis, just looking at it in terms of height and width, we flatten things out and we lose the actual volume of whatever it is we're drawing. And that's the big challenge here, is keeping the volume while also keeping the perspective. And yes, this leg should be moving back in space. The left leg should be moving back in space while the right leg is moving down. Let's see here. Cassiel says it would be interesting to do a Frazetta analysis or study this live or next. His composition, shading, and anatomy is awesome. He can make fantastic scenarios into realistic ones. You know what? Good point. And I have a really nice Frazetta book that I've been flipping through lately for the first time. I think that next week we'll do a Frazetta study. I know that given that with John coming in and giving us a quick guest lecture, and then now with me doing this study, we're not going to have time today to get into a Frazetta drawing, and I want to give it a decent amount of time. I think a Frazetta study is something that warrants like a full hour of drawing. So we will do that next week. I like that. Cassiel says, challenge accepted. In fact, I will try to pick an image over the course of this week and post that in the community section, the posts for the YouTube channel, so that you guys will know ahead of time what it is that I'll be drawing, in case you want to pull it and do a study of your own. You know, it's funny. One of the things John was talking about was how we sometimes distort things based on how we want them to feel versus how they actually look. But at the same time, I look at this figure and I block in that head, and then I'm like, well, that doesn't feel the way the head should feel. It's a matter of the amount of space that there should be for the neck. And maybe it's because I'm trying too much to use a box instead of just drawing a simple sphere. That's way too big. A simple sphere to block this in. And then I can come in and sort of divide that up into planes as opposed to boxing it into planes. Because even though I've got this guy leaning back now, I also am looking at this and I realize I've got to slim him down. He is way too large. And also his rib cage is getting a little bit narrower. Well, that's just not so much that the rib cage is getting narrower. It's more that I made its widest point at a point that is not the widest point of the figure, because really its widest point should be down here at near the base of it, and it should get narrower at the top. And I kind of drew the whole thing that narrow. Yeah, so just this whole exercise of cubes and cylinders boxes, particularly getting that relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis, getting it down on paper, it can be challenging. But it is a challenge that I am eager to take on because I see what happens when I put in the effort to study these things. And also to relate to what John mentioned about using the underwear kind of design or using a triangle. A lot of times when I use a box to work out the pelvis, I will come in and that cut that John was talking about, I'll just cut the box. Because the leg does in fact not connect just, well, it kind of does connect. The femur does connect at the base of the pelvic bone. The difference is that there's muscles, and John mentioned the tensor fasciae latae. The gluteus medius and the tensor fasciae latae are both what are the upper parts. They're sitting on the top of the thigh there, and they're kind of like almost like the deltoid, along with the gluteus maximus. They're almost like the deltoid, the shoulder muscles of the leg, in that it helps move the thigh. Not helps, it that's what, you know, is really moving the thigh around in its socket. So this one is going backward, now going to simple cylinders. That one's going backward. This one is going ever so slightly forward, not much forward, but slightly forward. And I like to jump around the figure just to keep me from focusing too much detail in one area. So I'll like sort of go in and block in the thighs, but then hop back up and then go up to the upper arms. So it's almost like I'm just slowly working my way out from the torso. And this is one of those cases where I do feel like the extra time I'm taking to redraw this, I'm capturing the volumes of the figure. But even though, you know, this is a very, the sketch that I'm drawing from, the Charles Bard sketch, it's a pretty simple sketch. It's not super detailed. But what I am missing, what I'm lacking here, and one of the other additional reasons for doing these studies is I'm missing the character of the sketch. This figure, feels like a leaner, more wiry figure than I have him here. I've got him more boxy and bulky. I mean, obviously, I'm using boxes to build the figure, and this is one of the challenges of constructive drawing, where it's not just trying to get a one-to-one, like this drawing lines up with the drawing that I'm using for reference. Constructive drawing, sometimes in that process of working out the boxes and how the parts connect, will you may obliterate some of that looseness of the figure. I mean, to be fair, I think it's just as easy to make the figure stiff doing a sight size, which that's the Bard approach. But it's just as easy to make a stiff figure doing sight size as it is with constructive drawing. I think the way that I've studied constructive drawing, it encourages invention with the figure and creating a sense of dynamics, so that even if you're not capturing the exact drawing perfectly, that you're going for more of that energy that I feel like I'm missing a little bit. I mean, in the long run, I think it comes down to just having a leaner figure. than what I've got here. And I can come in here and slim this guy down a little bit more. Doesn't have to be dramatically slimmer. And again, much like trying to work out the boxes in the figure, I'm reworking this cylinder and changing the angle of it and saying, oh, wait, I'm going to point this cylinder a little bit more facing up as opposed to the way I had it pointing down a little bit. In fact, I'm looking at this and I feel like I could go even higher. Let's see here. 2 questions. I'm going to ask the second one first. Byron says, do you tend to like your, he says, you do tend to like your beefy men. You know, it's funny because I feel like a lot of the times, like if you look at Morningstar, there's some beefy guys in there, but I feel like I've actually spent more time drawing sort of like wiry, more cat-like figures, both male and female. But yeah, there's definitely some beefcake in my comic wardrobe, as it were. So Negro Fazetta asks, do you think there's a benefit to going into a mall or public place and quick sketching people? Da Vinci said, go to the market, sketch public, and sketch people doing things every day. Yes, there's a great benefit to it. I don't do it nearly enough. I haven't done it in ages because we're in a pandemic and I'm not leaving the house. But I used to go exactly like you and Da Vinci mentioned. I used to go to a local mall and I would just take my sketchbook. I'd go to the food court, order a little food, and then just sit down and just draw people, you know, families sitting around, hanging out, maybe pick a spot, one of the bench. Like sometimes I'd sit in the food court, but then you kind of get similar just profiles of people eating. And I think it's more interesting. I would go find one of those benches somewhere in the middle of the mall where you can just watch people kind of walking and then pause as they go to and from stores, and just try to get a sense of character. I think that those studies are good for 2 things. One is just the study of character in general and almost like a sense of cartooning, getting the individual, the feel of a wide variety of body types. Because you're like, oh my God, all of these people have pretty much the same number of muscles and bones and general anatomy, and yet there's so much variety within the human creature, or the human machine, as Bridgman might say. And I'd say that one is just trying to capture all of that variety. So that's more of an observational character study. And then the second thing is just doing almost like simple gestures, maybe not as mechanically as I'm doing here, where you're working on all of these boxes and details, but just looking at a pose and it not being about the person, but it being about, all right, if that guy is walking and he's reaching to just casually toss something in a garbage can as he's walking by, you know, capturing the simple primitive of, you know, what's the relationship of his hip to his pelvis in terms of drawing like a simple box for the guy walking, a simple cylinder for the handout, capturing those gestures. I know that you're definitely interested in animation. That's a huge thing for animators, is just studying life in motion. So I agree that yes, it is very much a great and valuable study. And in lieu of maybe not having the time to go to a public place, or if in this current environment you don't feel safe going out in public and sketching, you can just put on, you know, TV or put on YouTube and just watch videos of people walking about, doing everyday things, just observing and doing sketches of people. So yes, I recommend doing it. I haven't been doing it, and that is to my detriment. I should do it. I should get back into the habit of it. Am I going to? I don't know if I'm going to have time right away, because I've got a lot on my plate trying to finish up that volume 2 of Morningstar, getting more personal pieces done. I've been doing all those Medusa studies. I've got a lot of other things that I'm actively working on that may get in the way of me doing those kinds of studies. But that said, sometimes I'll be having like dinner with my wife and we'll have the TV on and, you know, we'll watch TV. And once I finish eating, if we're watching a longer show, I may just break out a sketchbook and just start watching the actors and just pick a pose. And while the TV's on, I'm more listening to it than I am watching it. And I'll just do some studies. So yeah, there's definitely ways that you can continue to do this, whether you're going out. In person is always best. Being able to observe people out in the wild is the most educational. You get more of a sense of life in them. They're not stiff. They're not flattened out by, because when you're watching a TV, you are watching them on a flat screen. So you're still, it may not seem two-dimensional to you, but you're still losing a little bit of that. That said, it's like doing figure studies from photos. It's not as good as going and being in a live figure drawing class, but anything is better than nothing. As long as you're being aware of what you're losing with that two-dimensionalness, with figures being flattened out, as long as you're aware that that's happening and trying to adjust your drawing to compensate for it, to create more of a sense of volume, I think that it's an excellent exercise. So those are my thoughts on that. Hopefully that answers your question. And if you have any follow-ups, feel free to throw it in there. Yeah, we're already at an hour here. So I am probably only going to finish this sketch instead of starting a Bouguereau study. And we'll do, whatchamacallit. We'll do Frazetta next week, and then the Bouguereau studies we'll save for another week. The follow-up, Negro Facetta says, is it okay to sketch kids in parks, or is that creepy? I think it really comes down to your approach. If you're sitting there in a trench coat with a big hat down and you're just sitting there looking at kids and scribbling, then yeah, that looks kind of creepy. But if you're just in a jeans and a t-shirt, and you look a normal, friendly person hanging out at a park, you're just sitting at a park, I definitely don't think you would want to be sitting right at the edge of a playground, like a jungle gym, and you're just sitting there looking up at kids. You don't want to, that is creepy. But I think if you're just sitting in a distance and just observing a park and people walking around and kids and just drawing, then yeah, I think that that's more appropriate. I think it's about maintaining an appropriate level of distance and not dressing like a creep. If you're not acting creepy, then you might just be drawing, and a parent may come over and say, excuse me, what are you doing? And he just says, I'm doing drawing studies. You just show them a sketchbook filled with pages of scribbles and doodles. And he says, I'm a student. I'm just observing, drawing young people. You know, a lot of people, I've had that happen and have people ask me for the drawing. And, you know, some people are real precious about their sketchbooks. I'm not. I'll just tear the page out and give it to the parent. I'm not saying that you would have to do that, but that, as opposed to someone freaking out and being like, get away, don't draw my kids, I have found more often than not as an artist, it tends to go the other way, where the person wants the drawing that you made. So be prepared for that. I think that it's less creepy also, like, also instead of a park, I think a mall is a good place. If a mall, you know, that's for drawing kids, I think mall food courts are also a good place to go. And again, if you're drawing, that's the other thing. When I'm drawing, if I'm just out in public, if at any point someone actually came over and approached me and said, hey, stop looking at me, or I don't care if you're drawing me, that makes me uncomfortable, you stop drawing them. Or maybe, and you definitely stop drawing them, and maybe you move to a different location. You never want to invade people's privacy. James Gurney talked about that. He posts so many YouTube videos, I couldn't tell you which one. But he did have a video where somebody was, you know, he was drawing somebody and they were uncomfortable and asked him to stop. And he was just like, fine, whatever. But he mentions that in general, most people don't notice. And if they do notice, more than anything, they're curious. And that has been what I've found to be my experience drawing in public. So yeah, you know, as long as you're not behaving creepy, I think it's fine. See, Byron says only if you get caught someone somewhere. Let's see. I'm not sure if I understand your comment here, Cassiel. It says Bern Hogarth gives some migraines to understand his drawings. You mean diagrams? Let's see here. Cassiel says, I tried to draw the head of Bern Hogarth with structure and everything else, and the result gets pretty most realistic and handsome head that I draw. All right, well, you know what? I'm glad that you found that. Hogarth is controversial with some people. I see the benefits of him as well as the drawbacks, but the main thing that people are critical of Hogarth is just the fact that his figures seem to be flexing all of their muscles at once, as opposed to having a range of relaxed muscles versus flexed muscles. That seems to be the biggest criticism I see people level at Hogarth. But that said, I still, I see that there is a benefit to studying him. I don't use him as a resource as much anymore. I really started studying him a lot when I was earlier on, when I was a younger artist. But that said, the important thing is it helping you? Because if the resources you're looking at and the references are helping you progress as an artist, that's all that matters. So I'm glad you had that experience with the Hogarth drawing. So yeah, I just erased this leg before just to give it a little bit more of a curve to it. It was a little bit too stiff, which that is something that I am frequently guilty of, is blocking in my figures with completely straight lines as opposed to slightly curved forms. And then, as I'm building that primitive structure, I mean, you can very easily go in and just add a little bit more curve to things. But I find that a lot of times I may forget that or just get caught up in details. And I've got figures that are just a little bit too rigid and a little bit too blocky. So it's good to be aware of that. And all of these studies that I'm making and doing, the whole point of this is to improve your awareness of your own drawings. Because think about this. If you get good enough, it's not about you're so good that every drawing you do is perfect. It's that you've improved your awareness to the point that when you make mistakes, you can catch them and fix them. I almost never draw anything perfect. But what I strive to do is improve my sense of perception I can tell you right now at this figure, I try not to just cheat and drag things out and make them longer, but this leg is a little bit, both legs are too short. They definitely need to be longer in proportion to this figure. Really, this foot should probably be somewhere down here, the knee a little bit lower, and the other foot kind of equally longer. So, the figure should probably be about, well, that might be a bit much, but maybe that much, just like the length of the foot. It should be a little bit longer. And learning to assess these things while you're in the middle of a drawing, if you can think about that. If you can correct your own drawings, you can teach yourself how to draw better. That's really what all these things are about. Studying boxes, studying perspective, studying anatomy. What it is about learning enough so that when you're doing this, you can look at a line that you put down or a mark or a figure that you start blocking in, and you can say, oh, I've made a mistake here. I've caught it. Let me correct it and improve this drawing. And that's how you get to making really, really good drawings. I think there are people who just do great drawings out of the gate. But I think most of the people that you see and you think of as contemporary master draftsmen, contemporary artists, working artists today, when you see artists and they're able to draw these amazing drawings, what it is that they're really just fixing their mistakes on the fly very quickly. Very few of them just naturally draw just amazing things. What they're really doing is they're going through this process, this analytical revise and check and adjust. They're going through that process so quickly that it looks immediate, and therefore it looks like they just naturally draw everything perfect. What they're really doing is going through the corrective cycle at high rates repeatedly. So hopefully that's something for you guys to chew on mentally in terms of thinking about your approach towards drawing. You know, it's not about getting it right. It's about learning how to fix things that are wrong. So yeah. Again, this guy's still not perfect, but that little lengthening right there of the legs slightly, I think makes a big difference there in terms of improving the figure. All right, so that's, you know, another stab at this guy. Again, the thigh is a little bit bulkier than I drew it here. And come in and see, this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying you can just come in and bulk up a figure. You can take something that's maybe a little bit blocky and add some curve to it, or just flesh out the muscles on top of a figure. Make him a little bit dynamic, change his sense of body. And you can also just easily carve into a figure to make them slender, more cat-like, or emaciated if the drawing, the story you're telling requires or implies that. Okay, here we go. Let's see here. Negro Frazetta says, have you ever noticed that people on drugs have unique body movements and gestures? Is there a benefit to drawing those people in public? There's a benefit to drawing all people in public. It's not just one type of person. Cassiel says, I've been experimenting, studying various methods to draw the head. Negro Frazetta says, there's a lot of people on drugs where I live. Well, that is unfortunate. I hope they get the treatment help they need. But yes, I think part of the point of doing observational drawing is to draw a wide variety of people. You know, large people, thin people, fat people, you know, skinny people, tall people, short people, healthy people, people with mental illness. Just kept working, just learning how to capture the gamut of human experience. So yes, draw all people. I don't know if you necessarily, safety is important. So if you're gonna be out on the street and sketching, make sure that because it's very easy to get sucked into a drawing, make sure that you're in an environment where you feel safe, that you keep a certain level of situational awareness. I mean, I know I might be taking it too seriously because you might have been asking a joking question, but it is just worth remembering that, you know, if you're out in public and you're making art, if you're drawing something that, like if you were going to the zoo, well, this way, instead of a zoo, let's say if you're going to like a wild animal park where you'd have the windows down and lions just walking back and forth and cheetahs and hyenas. If you're just sitting there with the window down drawing, you want to be aware if, like, you know, you've got the sunroof open and maybe a cheetah might decide to hop on the roof and try to reach and claw your ass. So if you're drawing in environments where there is a potential for people that might be dangerous, just be aware of that. Like Cassiel says, I did a very dark joke. What are you doing, pal? I'm calculating the circumference of this rope. It says, why are you doing this? To hang my neck. Let's see here. He says, I know that's a type of joke and humor that a little number of people appreciate this. It depends. I mean, I personally like pretty dark sense of humor, but I also tend to keep my dark sense of humor to myself and my personal friends. It's not necessarily something that I don't try to brand myself online as an edgy, really dark humored guy in terms of like what I'm doing on YouTube. That is more of my personality, but it's something that I keep personal for. I mean, you guys are my friends. We're hanging out. You guys are buddies. We show up week after week. So maybe I'll let a little bit more of that come through, but I don't intentionally, you know, some people have a brand. They have an online personality that they project. When it comes to what I try to project online, I try to present positivity and encourage people, you know, to be creative, as you've heard me say many a time. So, but there's room for that. There's room for a little bit of darkness here on the channel. There's some space for that. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty much it for today. Again, thanks again to John Ercek for coming and being a guest here. For those of you who came later and didn't catch it, please definitely go back and rewatch the replay to catch his great lecture on stoicism, emotion stoicism in drawing artwork. I think it's very enlightening in terms of just working on your primitives and your fundamentals. Last question there. Negro Fazetta says, do you take your 30 by 26 drawing board when in public? I don't take a drawing board that big. I actually have a wide variety of drawing boards. I don't have one as big as you said, 30 by 26. The drawing board that I usually take to physical drawing classes is 18 by 24 inches. So that's this guy right here. And there's a handle at the bottom of it, so I can just kind of carry it with me. Usually, if I'm going to go drawing in public, I'll take a sketchbook instead. And I personally prefer spiral-bound sketchbooks as opposed to regular book-bound because, let's see here. Couple. I have all manner and all sizes of sketchbooks. This one's in 8. This is a 5.5 by 8.5 sketchbook, so fairly small. It's half the size of a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. But I like the spiral bound because then I can just flip it over and then I can just work in one hand and hold it in one hand, draw with the other hand, and that makes it a lot easier for me as opposed to if you've got a normal book, a normal sketchbook, a normal bound sketchbook, it's a little bit more awkward holding the whole thing open in your palm and drawing on one side. I'm not saying that that's a problem. I'm not saying it's something that you can't do. You can do it. If your hands are big enough and your hands don't get tired doing it, then by all means use a sketchbook like that. But I prefer to use wire-bound sketchbooks just so I can flip the whole thing over and then just have a whole surface sitting in my hand. And I'll use anything from a 5.5 by 8.5 to a 9 by 12 sketchbook. So I don't go, when I'm drawing publicly, I don't go really, really big. I'll go with a smaller size sketchbook. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So this one, a little bit larger. This is a 9 by 12 sketchbook. So, larger than an 8.5 by 11. So, but again, wire bound. So I can just flip it open, rest it in my palm, and then just sketch whatever I'm drawing, draw whatever I'm drawing. So for you, it's just, honestly, I'm sure you have a sketchbook somewhere in your house. And by the way, as I've mentioned before, I haven't mentioned this in a long time, but I have like 3-ring binders full of sketches where I just hole punch them and toss them in. I don't necessarily use whatever sketchbook you have. Use whatever you feel like drawing on. There's no rules about what size you should use when you go drawing in public. I also have I just have clipboards, and I'll put a little piece of cardboard on here, smooth cardboard, like it's the backing board from a drawing pad. I put that on there so that if I'm using marker, it doesn't bleed through, and I'll have like just sheets of paper underneath, and I'll just grab a sheet of paper and just put that on top, and then I just draw on just regular copy paper. So I just got a clipboard, and I'm drawing on that. Don't get caught up in rules or process or procedure or this is the way I need to draw in public. What's important is that you grab something to draw with and something to draw on, and you go and you draw. That's it. That's all that matters. So let's see here. What else here? A couple of comments in the chat. Cassiel says, I'm a very good person, but a little crazy sometimes. Let's see. Amar's in the chat. Says, hello, darkness, my old friend. Yeah, that's a reference for an old Simon and Garfunkel song. Just came back from grocery shopping. Yes, the stream has gone well. We're wrapping it up here now. Let's see here. Yeah, Amar also mentioned in terms of drawing in public. He said drawing on the bus was always fun. I was doing it long before that guy got famous for it on TikTok. You know, I spend zero time on TikTok. I'll take a look just to watch. I like watching other artists draw. Like what we're doing here, I watch the same thing on other artists. It's fun. So yeah, and drawing on the bus, that's a great place. You've got a captive audience, a wide variety of people, and you've also got a mix of people sitting and standing. Drawing on the bus, drawing on the train, you know, whatever is convenient. So let's see here. Yeah, Amar says, who knew that would become a thing? All right, guys. So we are wrapping it up here. Next week, Frazetta Studies. I got to go pick a piece that I'm going to do for next week. But as we always wrap up here, I'll tell everyone, if you enjoy this channel, if you would like to support this channel, if you want to get additional bonus live streams, and the live streams we do for our book study group, those are 2.5, 3 hour long study group live streams, even longer. Sometimes we get into it, get some deep talks, or we're just plowing through and covering tons of information on art books. Lately, we've been studying our Walt Reed, The Figure. We've been studying that book back and forth, which to me just continues to be a gold mine. All of that for as little as $2 a month. You can go to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. Let's see here. And if you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, you can go sign up for my monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. You'll get once a month, I send out an email. It's got work in progress animated GIFs, links to some of the live streams you may have missed. It's got, little blog posts with my creative process, what I'm thinking about, my day-to-day art life, just to kind of a view inside of the studio. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up physical copies of my books like Eye of the Gods, a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control, or Morning Star, story of Lucifer's fall from heaven, told as a Western. This is volume 1 of an 8-issue series. I'm currently working on volume 2. This book has issues 1 through 4 in it. Something I've been meaning to try. Let me switch back to this. Been meaning to bring up little animated GIFs to show you some pages. So this is Eye of the Gods. Here's a couple of pages from inside this story. My first graphic novel is Writer and Artist. Then a couple of pages from Morning Star. It's the inside of this series. We actually hide the tag there so you can see that. So yeah, these books available on Kindle or in physical copies. And if you want to purchase physical copies of the final issue of Morning Star, issue 8, you can go to jeremy.net. That's my main hub. You can pick up a copy of this. Again, also available in Comixology format. So yes, thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out, for all the great comments, the great conversation and feedback. And again, if you guys watch the replay and you've got additional comments for John Ercek, feel free to reach out to him on Instagram or through the South Bay Art Department. Feel free to leave comments on this channel. I'll definitely forward them to him and make sure he checks them out. And that is it, guys. Okay, that's it for now. Oh, let's see here. Amar says, I'll get volume 2 when it comes out for support those yeah, for those who support have had it for a while now, that's right. I run the whole issue. The whole series is available to read for free on Patreon. So you can definitely check that out. All right, guys, that's it for. Oh, great parting words. Be like water. Thanks, Amar. All right, that's it for now. Go be creative.